Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you are a Gemini and they are a Gemini. And this is one of those situations. I'm in a relationship with somebody where we are both Sagittarians, which is the opposite sign of Gemini. And in my estimation, the masculine signs, which are the air signs and the fire signs, are they really work well together when you pair up with somebody of the same sign. I'm not so sure that it works as well with the earth and water signs. This is just something that personally seems like it makes sense to me. And the reason I say this is because the masculine signs really love freedom. And so it only makes sense that if you're going to get together with somebody else, that you get together with somebody who shares that, because relationships are going to be, at least to some degree, about togetherness, but you have to navigate that, negotiate that. And so in this case, when we're talking about two Geminis, I don't know if I know. Actually, yes. I was just thinking in my own life, I don't think I know anybody like that. But in terms of like famous people, Michael J. Fox and his wife, who've been married for many, many years, are both Geminis. So perhaps that is a good example of two Geminis that can stay together for decades. So, one thing that the two Geminis will have is intellectual rapport. And I have to say, too, that, Gemini is a mutable air sign, and all air signs, and the other air signs are Libra and Aquarius, are going to have that same intellectual bent. They will have their own take on it, obviously. But this is something that I feel is really important and gets overlooked in relationships. It's much more common for people to talk about physical attraction than it is intellectual attraction or rapport. And I feel like it's really, really important, a lot more than is given credit. And one thing that how this can show up is in just basic conversations. If you're anybody who is a Gemini, you usually like to talk. Well, it's not just about hearing yourself talk, it's about exchanging ideas. And ideas are one of those things, it's like anything else in life. Some ideas are more interesting than others, and we don't always vibe with people intellectually. It's not about an echo chamber in terms of like your opinions. You can have really stimulating conversations with somebody who is diametrically opposed to you, politically, spiritually, in religious beliefs, what have you. You can really enjoy those conversations. It's about whether somebody is quick-witted, bright, and that's what Gemini naturally is. It has nothing to do with how many degrees they have, nothing whatsoever, because Gemini is one of those signs that could be self-taught very easily. Just because this is a sign that is intellectually curious. So here you have yourself who's like this, and you're with somebody who is coming from the same place, and that's wonderful. And let's face it, in our society today, we don't always have that kind of value placed on somebody who is intellectually curious. And I feel like that is kind of an underlying incompatibility that people don't really think of on the conscious level. Another thing is that this person is going to make you laugh. This person is going to be interesting. I talked about just being able to have that mental stimulation, but it's I guess it's kind of like along the same lines, saying that they're interesting, but amusing as well. Gemini is very witty, and you can have conversations with people, or just their basic personality type, and they're kind of serious all the time, or most of the time. And, I'm sure there are some cases where it's a great balance, but sometimes it can be kind of a downer. So having somebody that doesn't take life too seriously, and that's kind of how I see Gemini, is a plus. And so you have somebody who's just like you in that regard. And, being able to laugh, I mean, let's face it, taking oneself too seriously or taking life too seriously, that's a drag. And this person is usually very capable of seeing, not, lightening things up so that the other person doesn't just think, oh my God, this is so real. Because, to make it more metaphysical, if you will, life is temporary, so therefore we can say that it is semi-unreal, because it doesn't have, it doesn't stay the same, it's always changing. So how can you prove that it really, or it never really stays at a certain level? So being able to be detached, I could have put that down too, emotional detachment. Air keeps things lighter, and sometimes we need that, especially nowadays, let's face it. Another thing is flexibility, because Gemini is a mutable sign, because you're ruled by Mercury. Both of you are flexible, and in relationships, the ability to kind of I keep saying, what is that word? What is that word? Because I'm like, I want to say the exact word that I'm looking for. The ability to cooperate with one another, the ability to kind of like be able to flow with whatever is happening is so important. And some people aren't like that. Some people are very rigid, and it's not that they're jerks, it's just that they find it very hard to be spontaneous, and once they put their mind on something, then they want to see it through, and they don't want to kind of take a turn in another direction, a stubbornness kind of a thing. And being flexible means that you're able to kind of like adapt. I think that was the word I was looking for, adaptable. And let's face it, sometimes in life, things go in a different direction, and you have to have a certain degree of flexibility. There's a saying in the Tao that the branch in the storm that is too rigid, it snaps. But the one that can bend in the storm, it stays intact. And that makes a lot of sense. This could be somebody who's like kind of you're roaming. I said enjoy roaming around, because I think of Gemini Quicksilver and being very enamored by kind of, walking around the neighborhood. Actually, Gemini rules the third house, and one of the aspects of the third house is the local area. So I'm always surprised I don't have any plants in the third house, because I love to do that. I was like, I want my money back from my chart, because I should have a planet in the third house. Yeah, that idea of like just enjoying just walking around. Maybe it doesn't have to be like long hikes, but just kind of like if the perfect place for a Gemini person is in the city, because there's all this stuff happening, and you're just walking in a downtown area and looking in all the windows, and just seeing all the people walking by, and that's like heaven for you and this other Gemini person is just, if you don't live there, at least visiting there a lot and just taking in all the sights and sounds and walking around. And other people wouldn't necessarily be interested in that. I wouldn't be surprised if Geminis like to walk around more than most other signs. I would think so. There was something in a similar, I just thought of it. One thing I just thought of I want to mention before I go back to what I have put down here is that you might have somebody who is a great partner for you in terms of being a lifelong student. So, for instance, let's say that Gemini could be connected with languages, maybe foreign languages, especially if your sun is in the 9th house or something along those lines. But, regardless, so you and this other person, you might speak to each other in a foreign language and help each other to learn. And you would love that kind of thing. Or taking a course together if you're old enough, and you might be able to audit a class together. And that could be your way of bonding with each other, is through the intellectual pursuits. So, this person could be like a great teacher for you or a co-student, co-learner. And you kind of spur each other on in that sense. And I put here, what else did I put here? Freedom loving. Okay, now freedom loving, I put in parentheses, works both ways. And this is because, like I said, masculine signs, air and fire signs tend to be very independent. And as a result, they don't want to always be tied down to the other person, even if they're in love with somebody and they really enjoy that person's company. They still want to feel like they can breathe. And they don't want this heavy commitment where the other person is like, when are you coming home? What are you going to, well, that's not such a bad thing when you're coming home, but, you wanting, some people, they want that person by their side at all times, and they have a very tight grip on the other person, and that's not going to work with Gemini. But this type of person who is the same sign may encourage you, and I haven't been putting them down lately. I was saying that the other person could even have a moon in Gemini and not necessarily a sun, and that might work. I don't want to get too much into that. I thought that would be a good thing, but I'm just kind of letting that go. But in any case, this is not something that you will typically have to worry about if the other person is a Gemini as well, unless that person has a moon in Cancer or Taurus or maybe Scorpio, and so they might be a Gemini sun, but they may have lurking within themselves this kind of heavy emotional nature, and in that case, there might be something else that makes them more, because of that, they may not be the typical Gemini. But in general, they may be quite, willing to give you a long leash. But when it gets to be too kind of detached, then the people could be living separate lives in a lot of cases and not really spending enough time together. Maybe even taking separate vacations, but just spending long periods of time apart. And eventually, you start to grow apart when you don't live together or, see each other enough. So that's why I say it can work both ways, maybe too much independence. Another thing that could be challenging is that this sign is not necessarily commitment oriented. Not to say that a Gemini person cannot commit. If anything, I think that they would commit to a fellow Gemini person because of this detached attitude. If the other person does, have that typical Gemini detached attitude. But they may, a Gemini person may not see the reason to do so and say, why can't we just enjoy each other's company? Why do we have to make it some big production number like a wedding or or even moving in together? Why do we have to do this? We can just enjoy spending time together, and then we get to have our alone time. And they might have a good point, Maybe one person has the moon in Cancer, and to them it's kind of proof that the other person really loves them. So it's or when I say commitment oriented, perhaps they're like, I want to keep my options open. So maybe somebody else will come along. This is one of the things about Gemini. When I say fickle, emotionally fickle, and this is the thing, this goes into the next thing, mood changes and change of heart. So this could be like having a lot of emotional changeability, and also having a lot of changeability within one's opinions. So maybe one day the person's saying one thing, almost like two-faced, and then they say something else, and the person's like, but you just said da-da-da-da-da. And now you're saying this completely different thing. It's kind of crazy making. And so, and this could apply to both parties, where they're just kind of like all over the map. ADD on steroids. But I mean, that's, lack of focus, but I'm talking about very capable of just kind of changing, flip-flopping, one day to the next, and there's never any kind of core personality, core beliefs. The beliefs are twisting with the wind, and this is, air, wind. So this person, because they're mercurial, and these are for both people, they may be fickle about whether or not they care enough to continue in the relationship or start the relationship. And, somebody else comes along that they find interesting, and they're like maybe leaning in that direction. So the Gemini person can be the chameleon. So if they're changing into different things, depending on what day or what hour it is, how can they have that stability? That's a good question to ask. It helps if you have inner planets in Taurus or other fixed sign for the moon, because it'll make you more emotionally stable. Another thing I put down is not tuned in emotionally, but I did write or type out snarky attitude, flippant when angry. So I mentioned fickle, but I also had another F word, flippant, kind of like, and this could be just a general flippant attitude. If you know what flippant means, how can I describe it? Like kind of dismissive, kind of sarcastic or dismissive about other people's needs, not tuned in emotionally, maybe being emotionally shallow, and therefore not really respecting the other person's feelings on things. Obviously, that's going to cause a challenge, although because you're dealing with another Gemini, they may tolerate a rather shallow, emotional nature from their partner, more than maybe a Cancer would or a Scorpio person. So, but the thing is that people like to be heard, and that the other person understands how they feel. If a person who's angry uses sarcasm in a passive-aggressive sort of way to convey displeasure, that's not going to help matters. The other person's going to get pissed off. They're going to feel like they're being disrespected, but also dismissed. And that's like a big one. I wouldn't be surprised if the other party's dismissal of, when somebody is expressing themselves emotionally, if that isn't like a major cause of eventual breakup between people in general. because sometimes a person will say, oh, get over it. You know, you're such a drama queen, and just kind of like dismiss the person's, deep feelings. And that can make a person feel like they're not cared for. And even if you're not oriented in a way to really be comfortable with kind of like romantic conversations, or how would I put it, affectionate conversations and communication with your partner, even if that feels kind of like cheesy or awkward or something like that, you can still give the impression that you respect their feelings. Even if you don't see them, you don't understand why they feel that way. It's very important to honor another person's feelings, because they just are. That's just how they feel. And Gemini sometimes may be too dismissive of it. And I think it's because of that discomfort with emotions sometimes. And I know that not all Geminis are going to be totally like that. So don't bother writing to me, because I do get that, especially with the air signs. I'm not detached. I'm this, I'm that. Well, yeah, I mean, these are generalizations. That's all I can do. I can't go into like all the different permutations of what a sign can possibly be like. So, in any case, I hope that this resonated. If you'd like a private reading, most of my readings are astrology based, and I do have readings, for people who are, kind of finding out, like, is this person compatible with me? Usually, I would say if somebody is asking that question, it's because they're kind of noticing a few red flags that are concerning them about that person's behavior, and they're wondering, am I being a little bit too sensitive, or am I thinking too much about it? And I love to do those types of readings, because you know what? I don't think so. I think if you get like this kind of like a gut feeling about something, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be right on the money. And you're kind of trying to talk yourself out of it. So that's really what I'm doing, because obviously I don't know the other person, even if I'm looking at their chart. It's not really fair to kind of act like, oh yeah, this is how this person is. Well, it's only on paper. It doesn't mean that that's really how they are. And sometimes you may be misinterpreting them too. It's not just that they're the bad guy. So, and nobody's really the bad guy. But anyway, the link to my online order page is below. I'm at RainaMoonAstrology.com. Take care. Bye.